Millionaire marries an obese woman for a bet and is surprised when the chandelier-lit hall pulsed with the discreet sound of a live band. The atmosphere exuded exclusivity, with impeccably dressed waiters weaving through a crowd of business people, celebrities, and politicians. It was the kind of party where only the most privileged could gain entry, a realm William Anderson navigated with effortless mastery. William was a man whose presence never went unnoticed. Tall, with striking features and a tailored suit that seemed like a second skin, he moved through the space like a king in his castle. Confidence radiated from every gesture, every condescending smile. To him, the world was a chessboard, and people were mere pawns to be manipulated. So William, ready for something truly challenging, teased Charles, his longtime friend and partner in countless parties and business ventures. Charles held a champagne glass, his eyes gleaming with a hint of mischief. William raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Challenging? You know I don't back down from challenges, Charles, but I hope it's something worthy of my time. Charles laughed, leaning in and lowering his voice so no one else could hear. I have a proposition, a bet, actually. I want to see if you can win over someone outside your, let's say, usual type. William laughed loudly, drawing glances from nearby guests. Outside my type? Charles, any woman can be won over. It all depends on what you're willing to offer. Unfazed, Charles pointed to the entrance of the hall where a woman had just walked in. Then prove it. See that woman over there? Catherine Sanders. I've chosen her for you. William followed his friend's gaze and spotted Catherine. Unlike the women he was used to, Catherine exuded a confidence that was almost defiant. Her hair was styled in a simple bun, and she wore an understated dress that, while elegant, didn't demand attention. There were no extravagant jewels or heavy makeup. She was authentic and uninterested in pleasing anyone. She's far from my usual type, William commented with an ironic smile. But why her? Charles took a sip of champagne before replying, because she doesn't care about men like you. This is going to be fun to watch. And what's the bet? William asked, intrigued. $5 million. You have to marry her and stay married for a year. William laughed again, but this time there was a hint of arrogance in his laugh. Deal. Consider this an easy win. 2 days later, at an exclusive restaurant in the heart of the city, William met Catherine. He had orchestrated the encounter with the precision of a strategist, ensuring the setting was as impressive as possible. Candles, a pianist playing softly in the background, and a reserved table strategically placed next to a window overlooking the city lights. When Catherine arrived, however, her demeanor surprised William. She entered without hesitation, unfazed by the setting or the imposing figure waiting for her. Catherine Sanders, William asked, rising to greet her. That's me. You must be William Anderson, she replied, extending her hand firmly. Her tone was calm, but filled with conviction. They sat down, and William began his usual routine, boasting about his success, his power, and hinting that he could offer her a lifestyle most people could only dream of. Catherine, however, didn't seem impressed. She watched him with a clinical gaze, almost as if evaluating every word. You're quite confident, aren't you? She remarked with a small smile. Almost as if you're used to always getting what you want. That's because I do, he replied, maintaining his composure. And I think that could work to your advantage. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. Let's save some time, William. I know about the bet. The statement landed like an unexpected blow. William blinked, momentarily surprised, but quickly regained his composure. Oh, really? And yet you're here? I am, but on my terms, Catherine said, placing her hands firmly on the table. I'm not interested in your money or your luxuries. You want to fulfill your bet? Fine. We'll get married, but I maintain my independence. My choices, my routine, everything remains under my control. And at the end of a year, we part ways. No arguments, No attempts to extend something that will never be real. For a moment, William was silent, staring at her. He was used to women melting under his charm, but Catherine was different. She seemed unshakable. "You're direct. I respect that," he finally replied with a calculated smile. "But I never enter a game to lose." "Then you'd better play well," Catherine shot back, standing up. "See you at the wedding." She walked away before William could say anything, leaving him intrigued. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't in control, and that only made the game more interesting. The wedding day arrived quickly. The chapel was small and elegant, with stone walls and subtle stained glass windows that filtered sunlight. Nothing about the ceremony resembled the grand events William Anderson was accustomed to. He, who thrived on luxurious parties and fawning crowds, felt out of place in such simplicity. There were few attendees, just Charles, the friend who had initiated the bet, a small group of Catherine's family members, and a handful of discreet staff. Catherine had insisted on keeping the wedding modest. She rejected all of William's efforts to turn the occasion into a spectacle. "If this is just a game for you, there's no need to overdo it," she said in a sharp tone that ended any further discussion. She entered to the soft strains of classical music without a flashy gown or extravagant jewelry. The white dress she wore was simple, but her poise and confidence outshone any attempt William might have made to impress her with opulence. He couldn't help but admire her, though his frustration grew at her clear refusal to play by his rules. When the vows were exchanged, William spoke the words with ease, as if closing a business deal. Catherine, on the other hand, spoke firmly, but without any apparent emotion. It was as though she wanted to make it clear that her reasons for being there were very different from his. Right after the wedding, William tried to establish the dynamic he was used to in his relationships. He arranged an evening at his mansion, complete with the finest champagne, dishes prepared by a renowned chef, and an entire staff ready to cater to Catherine's every need. However, she dismantled his plans with just a few words. "I don't need any of this," Catherine said, setting aside the custom menu. "A salad and a glass of wine are more than enough for me." William was taken aback. "Don't you want to enjoy it? This place was designed to offer the very best." "I'm not impressed by things, William." Catherine took a calm sip of water. "I like simple, functional things. This kind of luxury isn't part of who I am." William swallowed hard. For the first time, he realized his usual approach would have no effect on her. In the days that followed, William tried to win Catherine over with grand gestures. He ordered jewelry, designer dresses, and even arranged a last-minute trip to a private island. Catherine, however, declined everything with the same firmness. "You're wasting your time," she said, returning a box containing a diamond-encrusted necklace. "I don't need you to give me things I never asked for." "Catherine, it's just a gift. There's no need to make it an issue," William replied, trying to keep his composure. "It's an issue because you think you can buy me, William, but you can't. If this marriage is going to work for a year, you need to understand one thing. I'm not one of your conquests." Those words hit William like a blow. For the first time, he felt the weight of the bet. Catherine was unlike any woman he had seduced before. She wasn't interested in his possessions, his wealth, or his influence, and that irritated him more than he cared to admit. The tension escalated when William tried to interfere with Catherine's routine. He insisted that she quit her job, arguing that, as his wife, she didn't need to worry about a mundane occupation. Catherine, however, stood her ground. "My work is part of who I am. I'm not giving it up because you think it's inappropriate," she said firmly, her eyes locked on his. "You may have control over many things, William, but not over me." William, unaccustomed to hearing no, was left speechless. For the first time, he felt completely out of his depth. Catherine was a mystery to him, and it unsettled him deeply. As the days turned into weeks, William realized that winning Catherine over would be the greatest challenge of his life. She was a fortress, unwavering in her principles and indifferent to the power he so proudly wielded. To her, the marriage was a temporary contract, and she was determined to leave it unscathed, untouched by his games. And for William, the bet, which had once seemed like a guaranteed victory, was beginning to feel like a game he didn't know how to win. The first days of marriage had already revealed to William that Catherine was not an easy woman to deal with. Still, he was not willing to relinquish control. To William, power was more than an attribute. It was the foundation of who he was. Catherine, on the other hand, seemed determined not to give up even an inch of her independence. On a sunny morning, William surprised her with an elaborate breakfast on the mansion's veranda. Catherine arrived at the table with her usual serene expression, but she didn't seem impressed. As she sat down, William began outlining his latest plan. "I've been thinking," he said casually, stirring his coffee. "You don't need to work anymore. I have more than enough resources for you to enjoy whatever you want." Catherine paused mid-spread, her knife still over her bread, and looked at him calmly, though with the firmness he was beginning to recognize. "I didn't ask for your permission to work, William, and I'm not going to stop just because you think you should decide that for me." "Catherine, this isn't about permission," he replied, trying to sound reasonable. "It's about what makes sense. You're my wife now. There's no need for you to tire yourself out with something that doesn't fit. Well, our lifestyle." She crossed her arms and leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "William, you need to understand something. Just because you're used to controlling everything and everyone doesn't mean it'll work with me. My work is important to me. It's my choice, not yours." "You're overreacting, Catherine. I'm just trying to make your life easier." "No, William, you're trying to mold it into what you think is right, and that's not going to happen." Confrontations like this had become a regular part of their relationship. Small disagreements quickly escalated into heated arguments. One afternoon, William tried to reorganize the office Catherine had set up in one of the mansion's rooms. "I had the team bring in more suitable furniture for your space," he announced, as if doing her a favor. "The ones you picked don't match the rest of the house." Catherine stared at him in disbelief, holding a book she had just placed on a shelf. "Did you even ask if I wanted anything changed? This is my space, William, not yours." "Catherine, it's just an office. It's not like it's anything that important." She let out a dry laugh and crossed her arms. "It's important because it's mine. And that's exactly what you don't understand. You think everything has to be your way, but not everyone lives to cater to your whims." William was silent, not because he agreed, but because he didn't know how to respond. Catherine had an almost infuriating ability to expose his flaws, and it threw him off balance. Frustrated, he left the room, but for the first time, something made him reflect. Despite the conflicts, William couldn't help but see Catherine in a new light. He was used to people bending to his presence, but she was a fortress. No matter how much he tried, she always held her ground, guarding her autonomy as if it were her armor. During dinner one evening, after yet another argument, William sat silently watching her. Catherine seemed unshaken, eating calmly while flipping through a newspaper. He couldn't stop himself from asking a question that escaped his lips. "How can you be so uncompromising?" She looked up from the newspaper and met his gaze, surprised by the question but no less confident. "Because I know who I am, William, and nothing you do is going to change that." Her words struck him in an unexpected way. He realized that his arrogance, so deeply ingrained, was being challenged in a way he had never experienced before. For the first time, he began to wonder why he felt such a need for control. Catherine forced him to look at himself in a way that was uncomfortable, almost as if she were holding up a mirror he didn't want to face. The days went on, and though the tension remained, something began to shift in William. While he continued to try imposing his will, it became clear that Catherine was sparking a transformation in him. Her independence and determination challenged him in ways he didn't know how to handle. For the first time in years, he began to question the foundations of his behavior, though he still refused to admit it out loud. For Catherine, the clashes were just part of the game. She knew William wouldn't give up easily, but she also knew she was leaving her mark on him, a small crack in the facade of a man who thought he could control everything. And for her, that was already a victory. William's mansion was alive with lights and sound. The grand hall looked like a movie set, with flawless decor and guests dressed in outfits that exuded luxury and power. It was one of many parties William hosted to maintain his influence and strengthen alliances. But this time, there was a unique element: Catherine. From the moment they arrived, she drew attention, not because she was dressed extravagantly, but because her demeanor stood out in the superficial environment. Catherine wore an elegant black dress, understated but impeccably tailored. With minimal jewelry and light makeup, her presence didn't scream wealth. It radiated intelligence and self-confidence. William watched her from a distance while engaging in conversation with a group of businessmen. He had expected Catherine to feel out of place in such a setting, but to his surprise, she seemed perfectly at ease. He noticed that she was already surrounded by guests who listened to her intently. Catherine had a way of speaking that captivated people. Her words were straightforward, but laced with a natural wit that made others laugh and feel at ease. "Catherine is interesting, William," one of the businessmen beside him remarked. "She's not like the women we usually see around you. She's authentic." William forced a smile, but the admiration others were beginning to show for her unsettled him. Part of him felt threatened by how Catherine effortlessly stole the spotlight. He was used to being the center of attention, and now here she was, shining in her own way. As the party reached its peak, William decided to intervene. He approached the group Catherine was with and tried to pull her aside for a private conversation. "You're impressing the guests," he said as he guided her to a quieter corner. Catherine looked at him with an enigmatic smile. "Isn't that the idea? After all, I'm your wife. I thought you'd appreciate that." "I do, but you need to be careful not to cross certain boundaries," he said, his tone laced with control. She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Boundaries? Funny to hear that from you, William, but don't worry, I know exactly where mine are." He felt the jab and tried to mask his discomfort, but something about her unsettled him. It wasn't just the way she challenged his authority, it was the growing admiration he felt for her intelligence and strength. In the days that followed, William doubled down on his efforts to break Catherine. He believed her resistance was a facade, something he could dismantle over time. He planned exotic trips and arranged meetings with influential people, trying to create situations where she would depend on him. Catherine, however, remained unshaken. During a conversation about a trip he had meticulously planned for the two of them, she cut through his enthusiasm with a simple statement. "I can't go, William. I have work and important commitments this week." "Catherine, you're my wife. Those things can wait," he retorted, almost indignant. She took a deep breath and responded calmly but firmly, leaving no room for argument. "I'm not just your wife. I'm a person with priorities that won't revolve around your world. If you want to go, go ahead. I'll be just fine here." He felt his frustration mount, but he also began to realize something he had never faced before. Catherine didn't need him, and that left him completely out of his comfort zone. One night, sitting alone in his office, William reflected on their relationship. He was a man used to being admired and obeyed, and Catherine was the antithesis of that. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or power. It was as if she were constantly showing him that there was a world outside the one he believed to be absolute. He closed his eyes and sighed. feeling something that unsettled him deeply: respect. For the first time, William began to question why he felt such an intense need to control Catherine, perhaps because she was a mirror reflecting everything he didn't know how to be. As these thoughts grew within him, William realized that, for the first time in years, he wasn't in control. And that feeling, though uncomfortable, was stirring something inside him that he didn't yet know how to name. The night was cold, and a light drizzle fell as Catherine and William dined in silence on the mansion's expansive terrace. Since the beginning of their marriage, there had been moments like this, where the silence between them was less a sign of comfort and more a quiet battlefield. But that night, something felt different. Catherine, usually serene and in control, seemed distracted. Her eyes gazed into the distance, as if lost in memories William had yet to uncover. He noticed. For the first time in weeks, he decided not to use the silence as an opportunity to assert his will. Instead, he asked with an almost genuine curiosity, "What are you thinking about?" Catherine turned to him, surprised. The vulnerability in the question didn't match the confident and arrogant man she knew. She hesitated for a moment, but something inside her urged her to answer, even if only vaguely. "I was thinking about how selfish choices can destroy lives," she said, almost as if speaking to herself. William frowned. "What do you mean?" She gave a faint smile, but it was bitter, filled with pain. "It's not something I like to discuss. Let's just say that power, when misused, leaves marks that never disappear." "Have you been hurt by someone powerful?" he asked, a mix of interest and discomfort in his voice. She looked away as if debating how much to share. "Let's just say someone's ambition cost me more than I could have imagined. My family, my life, everything unraveled in a matter of months. When you see that happen, you understand that the world is far crueler than it seems." Her tone was cold, but the sadness in her voice was undeniable. William felt a knot in his stomach. He wanted to ask more, but something stopped him. Catherine rose slowly, leaving her glass of wine on the table. "Good night, William," she said shortly, her farewell carrying a weight he couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, Catherine's words echoed in William's mind. The way she spoke of her past, though lacking detail, had stirred something in him. For the first time, he realized how little he knew about her beyond the surface. He began to wonder what could have caused such deep pain in someone so strong. William wasn't a man who left questions unanswered. Using his connections, he started investigating Catherine's past. He believed it would give him an advantage, a way to understand what drove her. What he didn't realize was that this investigation would lead him to a truth that would completely alter his perception of himself. As William delved into Catherine's history, something began to shift within him. Memories of decisions he had made in the past, often without considering the consequences for others, resurfaced. Catherine was a constant reminder of how he had used his power and ambition to shape the world to his liking, without a second thought for the damage he left in his wake. A conversation with Charles months earlier came back to him. Over lunch, Charles had casually mentioned William's acquisition of a smaller company, which had led to the collapse of several family-run businesses. "You were ruthless in that deal, William. Brilliant, of course, but ruthless," Charles had said, laughing in what at the time felt like approval. William hadn't thought about it since, but now the possibility that Catherine could be one of the people affected by his thirst for power loomed in his mind like a shadow. One night, while reviewing the reports he had requested from his contacts, William found the connection he feared. Catherine's father's company had been one of the casualties of his actions. He vaguely remembered the case, a strategic acquisition that had destabilized smaller competitors. To him, at the time, it had been just another power move, but for Catherine, it had marked the beginning of her family's downfall. As he finished reading the documents, William felt something he rarely experienced: guilt. He closed the folder and ran his hands through his hair, trying to process what he had just uncovered. For the first time, William realized that his decisions, those he had justified as just business, had faces, stories, and lives attached to them that he had never considered. The next morning, when he saw Catherine in the kitchen, William watched her differently. She was there, slicing fruit with her usual calm demeanor, but to him it seemed as though there was an invisible weight on her that he had never noticed before. "Catherine, I wanted to ask you something," he began, but his voice faltered. She looked at him, curious. "Yes?" He wanted to tell her the truth. He wanted to confess what he had discovered, but he couldn't find the courage. Instead, he shook his head. "Never mind." Catherine didn't press him, but the look she gave him seemed to say she knew more than she let on. As she returned to what she was doing, William realized that for the first time he was confronting not just the consequences of his actions, but the very essence of who he was. And as he looked at Catherine, he knew he wouldn't be the same after this discovery. The silence hung over the mansion like a heavy cloud. William had spent days grappling with the truth he had uncovered, but had yet to find the courage to confront Catherine. The certainty that he had been responsible for her family's downfall weighed on him, crushing the arrogance that had always defined him. Catherine, on the other hand, seemed calm, but William knew that her serenity concealed something deeper. She had always been a fortress, and now he was beginning to understand why. Her words, her gestures, even her resistance to his power and wealth, it all made sense now. She wasn't just an independent woman. She was someone who had survived the worst of what he had caused. That night, Catherine found William in his office. He was sitting in his leather chair, holding a glass of whiskey that remained untouched. When she entered, he looked up, and for a moment, they stared at each other in silence. "You found out, didn't you?" she asked, her voice calm but laden with underlying tension. William swallowed hard. He knew there was no avoiding the conversation anymore. "Yes, I found out. Catherine, She raised a hand, cutting him off. "You don't need to explain. Honestly, I expected this to happen. Part of me even hoped you wouldn't find out so soon. But here we are." He set the glass down on the desk and stood, trying to gather his thoughts. "Catherine, I had no idea. I didn't know that the decisions I made back then destroyed your family. I'm so sorry." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "You're sorry? Does that fix anything, William? Because last I checked, my family is still ruined. My father—" Her voice faltered for a moment, but she regained her composure. "My father took his own life because of your ambition." William froze. He knew his actions had caused harm, but hearing it in such raw words was devastating. He tried to approach her, but Catherine stepped back, maintaining the distance between them. "Do you know why I agreed to this marriage?" she continued, her eyes fixed on his. "It wasn't because of the bet, not for the money, not for the challenge. It was because I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose control, to understand, even for a second, what it's like to be a pawn in someone else's game, just like you did to my father, to me, and to so many others." "Catherine, please." William tried to interject, but she didn't stop. "You destroyed the company my father built with hard work. He was an honest man, William. He couldn't compete with the power you had, with the manipulations you used in the market. When he lost everything, he lost himself. And my mother? She was never the same again. I had a life, a family, and you took it all away." Her words hit him like blows, each one more painful than the last. William felt his legs weaken and sank back into his chair, running his hands over his face. "I didn't know," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Catherine, if I had known—" "But you didn't want to know," she cut in sharply. "To you, they were just numbers on a spreadsheet, small businesses, faceless names. You never stopped to think about the lives at stake. because in your world, all that matters is winning." For a moment, silence fell between them again. Catherine crossed her arms and looked out the window, as if avoiding his gaze. "And now, what are you going to do, William? Apologize? Throw money at it and try to fix something that can't be fixed?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. William didn't know what to say. For the first time, he had no ready solution, no plan to make things right. The truth was, he was lost. "I don't know," he admitted, with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "I don't know how to fix what I've done, but I'll figure it out. I need to. For you. For what I did to your family." Catherine stared at him for a long moment, weighing his words. There was pain in her eyes, but also an unyielding determination. "Don't do it for me, William. Do it because you need to change. Because if you don't, you'll keep being the same man who destroys lives without a second thought." She turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she glanced over her shoulder and added, "I don't expect you to understand what it's like to carry this every day. But maybe, just maybe, you'll start to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you." When Catherine left, William remained there, staring into the void. He knew that nothing would ever be the same. For the first time, he felt the real weight of his choices, and for the first time, he began to question who he was and who he wanted to become. The pain he felt now was a reflection of the pain he had caused, and he knew he had to face it, no matter how difficult it would be. The days following his conversation with Catherine were a whirlwind in William's mind. He felt stripped of all the arrogance that had defined him for so long. For the first time, the gears of his perfect world had stopped, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. The guilt was heavy, but along with it came the need for change. Not because he wanted to win Catherine back, but because he knew he had to be better. For her, for himself, and for everyone he had wronged. The first step was the hardest. William began revisiting old files and reports from his past acquisitions. Each company acquired, each competitor defeated, carried stories he had never bothered to know. Now, with fresh eyes, he saw the human impact of his decisions. The first visit was to a small neighborhood where the headquarters of a company he had purchased years ago had once stood. The acquisition had left dozens of families without livelihoods. He walked through the area like a stranger, aware of the distrustful glances he received. He found one of the company's former owners, an elderly man now living modestly. "What do you want here, Anderson?" the man asked, his voice filled with obvious resentment. William hesitated, then finally said, "I want to apologize. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I'm here to admit I was wrong. If there's anything I can do to help." The man fell silent, surprised. He hadn't expected to see William there, much less hear those words. Though the bitterness lingered, the gesture opened a small door for dialogue. William left the area feeling a mixture of relief and burden. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could at least try to build something from the destruction he had caused. Catherine noticed the change in William. She watched him from a distance, curious, but still skeptical. To her, it seemed unlikely that a man like him could truly change. Yet something about his behavior began to catch her attention. He was quieter, more introspective, and his actions, once full of ostentation, now seemed simpler, almost humble. One morning, as she passed William's office, Catherine noticed papers scattered across his desk. They were lists of families, businesses, and contacts related to his former acquisitions. She saw him sitting, head down, jotting something with a serious expression. The sight made her pause for a moment. He looked different. Not the arrogant man she had known, but someone trying to find a new path. Later that day, she caught him leaving in a hurry. "Off to somewhere important?" Catherine asked casually, her curious eyes studying him. "I'm meeting with some people, Trying to make things right, he replied, without boasting or trying to impress her. His tone was honest, devoid of arrogance. Catherine nodded, but said nothing more. She knew actions spoke louder than words, and for now she would just observe. William continued his visits, some harder than others. Not everyone was willing to hear his apologies, and he accepted that without complaint. There were moments when he almost gave up, questioning whether his efforts even mattered, but somewhere deep inside, he knew he had to keep going. It was a lonely journey, but a necessary one. One particularly impactful meeting was with a young mother. She greeted him coldly, her voice trembling as she spoke about losing her job at the company William had acquired. As she described the struggles of raising her children alone, William felt the full weight of his decisions. He offered financial support, but the woman refused. "Money doesn't fix everything, Mr. Anderson," she said firmly. "Sometimes people just want to be seen as more than numbers." Her words stayed with him. He realized that the change he sought wasn't just about repairing material damages, but about reconnecting with the humanity he had ignored for so long. Catherine, though still emotionally distant, began to see something different in William. He didn't make a show of his actions, didn't seek recognition or applause. He just acted, knowing that for many, it would never be enough. One evening, as they both sat in the living room, Catherine broke the silence. "I heard you visited the Santos family today. They lost a lot because of you." William nodded, not meeting her gaze. "They did, and I'll never be able to give back everything they lost. But I'm trying to do something, even if it's small." Catherine studied him for a moment before responding. "It's a start." There was something in her tone that felt different from her usual hardness. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't disdain either. It was almost respect. Though William was still at the beginning of his journey, something in him had already changed. He was beginning to understand that the power he once used to dominate could perhaps be used to build. And though forgiveness was still far away, he felt that he was finally on the right path, a path that for the first time didn't revolve around himself. The days at the mansion began to take on a different rhythm. The tense silence that had once defined William and Catherine's interactions gradually gave way to moments that felt less heavy. The tension hadn't disappeared entirely, but something new hung in the air. Perhaps it was the fact that William, for the first time, not only acknowledged Catherine's boundaries, but also respected them. One afternoon, while Catherine worked in her makeshift office, William appeared at the door with a calm, almost hesitant expression. He was holding 2 cups of coffee and extended one to her. "I thought you might want a break," he said with a small smile. Catherine looked at him, surprised, but accepted the cup. "Thank you, I could use one." He didn't step into the room as he might have in the past, but stayed at the door, careful not to intrude. Catherine noticed the effort, and it disarmed her for a brief moment. "How was your visit today?" she asked, referring to the work he'd been doing to repair the damage from his past actions. William sighed before replying, "It was hard. Some people don't even want to hear me out, and I don't blame them. But I understand. I'm just trying to do what I can, even if it's not much." Catherine nodded slowly, observing him with curiosity. "It sounds like you're learning something important." "I am," he admitted, his tone genuine, "about people and about myself." The exchange was brief, but meaningful. For the first time, they were speaking as equals, without the weight of the past or the shadow of the bet between them. In the days that followed, small moments of connection began to surface unexpectedly. One evening, William found Catherine in the garden, reading under the glow of a lamp. He approached her without intending to interrupt, but she looked up and smiled. "Enjoying the book?" he asked, pointing to the cover. "Yes. Do you know it?" she replied, her tone curious. "I read it a long time ago, but I think I'd understand it better now." The conversation flowed naturally from there, and for hours they discussed the plot, ideas, and themes of the book. By the time they realized how much time had passed, it was late at night, and both felt something new. A connection that wasn't based on games or power, but on mutual respect and understanding. As time went on, William realized that respecting Catherine's space also gave him a new perspective on himself. He no longer felt the need to dominate conversations or situations. Instead, he listened. And Catherine, in turn, began to let her guard down, acknowledging that there was something different about him. Catherine still kept an emotional distance, but the initial coldness gave way to something softer. One particularly quiet evening, as they sat together in the living room, William made an unexpected confession. "Catherine, I know what I did to you, and your family is unforgivable. But I want to be honest with you. I don't just want to fix the past. I want to build something real with you." She looked at him, surprised by the declaration. There was no arrogance or condescension in his voice, only sincerity. Still, she remained firm in her response. "William, I see that you're changing, but trust is something that's earned, not given. And in our case, that will take time." He nodded, respecting her words. "I know. I don't expect you to believe me right away. I just want you to know that I'm willing to wait and to work for it." In the days that followed, William continued to demonstrate his changes, not just through words, but through actions. He began participating more in Catherine's life in subtle ways, never overstepping, but showing that he was present. Moments of connection became more frequent. Casual conversations over breakfast, walks in the garden, or simply shared silence at the end of the day. Catherine, though cautious, began to sense that there was something genuine in William's transformation. He was no longer the arrogant, manipulative man she had met, and while she wasn't ready to fully open her heart, a small spark of hope began to flicker. One night, as they sat together on the terrace, gazing at the starry sky, William spoke about a future he had never imagined before. "Catherine, I want to do more than just fix the past. I want to build something meaningful, and I want you to be a part of it, if you're ever ready." She remained silent for a moment, looking up at the stars. Finally, she turned to him with a steady gaze, not cold, but firm. "I appreciate what you're saying, William, but there's still a long way to go. If you're willing to take that journey, then maybe, just maybe, we can discover something together." William nodded, a small smile on his face. "I'm willing." In that moment, something seemed to shift between them. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a genuine beginning, and for both of them that was more than enough. Time passed, and William's mansion, once filled with tension and heavy silences, began to hum with a new energy. The interactions between him and Catherine had shifted from confrontations to genuine dialogues, rooted in respect and empathy. There was still caution in her gestures, but there was also an openness. William, for his part, displayed patience and humility, qualities that had once seemed impossible to associate with him. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Catherine decided to break the silence. "I've been watching you, William. Not just what you've done for me, but what you're trying to do for those you've wronged." William stopped walking and turned to face her, attentive. "And what do you see?" She smiled faintly, though her eyes were serious. "I see someone who's changing, someone who's trying to be better, not to look better, but because he truly believes in it." He took a deep breath, as if her words were a confirmation of something he hadn't dared admit, even to himself. "I still have a lot to make right, Catherine, and I know not everything can be fixed, but I want to keep trying, not just to mend the past, but to build something real." She nodded, and for the first time, he saw a different light in her eyes, a mix of acceptance and hope. Months later, on a quiet morning, Catherine sat at the breakfast table holding a small pregnancy test in her hands. She stared at the result, absorbing the revelation. Surprise quickly gave way to a wave of emotion she couldn't fully explain. It was a new chapter, a symbol of something she had never expected to happen. When William entered the room and saw her so deep in thought, he frowned with concern. "Is everything okay?" She looked up at him, trying to contain a smile. "I need to tell you something." He stepped closer and sat beside her as Catherine handed him the test. William looked at the small object in his hands, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. When he finally understood, his face lit up. She nodded. "Yes, I'm pregnant." For a moment he was silent, absorbing the news. Then a genuine smile, perhaps the truest she had ever seen from him, spread across his face. He took her hands, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Catherine, this is more than I could have imagined. Thank you for giving me this chance. I promise I'll be someone you and our child can be proud of." The news of the pregnancy brought a new dynamic to their relationship. Catherine began to let her guard down even more, and William, driven by this newfound responsibility, deepened his efforts to change and become a better man. He continued his visits to repair past damages and began dedicating time to social projects, something he had never considered before. Catherine watched all of this closely. One day, as he explained a new project aimed at helping families who had lost everything, she lightly touched his shoulder. "You're doing good work, William. I want you to know that." He turned to her, surprised. "Thank you, but there's still so much I need to do, and so much I have to thank you for. If it weren't for you, I never would have started." She smiled. "Maybe that's why we're here, to help each other become better, together." A few weeks before the baby's arrival, William made a proposal Catherine never expected. He led her to the garden, where a small table was set with flowers and candles. The setting was simple, yet deeply meaningful. "Catherine, I know we started this all wrong, with manipulations, bets, everything but sincerity. But now I want to do this the right way. I want us to be a real family, and I want to marry you, not out of obligation, but out of love." Catherine stood in silence, looking at him. There was emotion in her eyes, but also the certainty that he was being genuine. "Yes, William, I accept, but this time no games or expectations. Just the two of us." The ceremony was intimate, far from the luxury that had once defined William's life. Only close friends and a few of the families William had helped along his journey of redemption were present. Catherine wore a simple dress, and William, in a modest suit, looked more human than ever. When they exchanged their vows, the look between them was filled with silent promises. It wasn't a fairy tale, but a story of growth, regret, and rebuilding, and that was far more meaningful than anything else. After the wedding, William continued working on his transformation. He knew he could never fully erase the past, but he was determined to build a future worthy of Catherine and the baby on the way. And each day, Catherine felt that she had made the right choice in giving this new man a chance. When the baby was born, they both realized that the small, fragile life before them was more than a symbol of hope. It was living proof that even in the most unlikely circumstances, love and change could flourish. Together, William and Catherine began a new chapter, this time without games or manipulations, just love, hard work, and a genuine desire to be better together. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.